We're pleased today to have with us Jim Thomas. He's a Baptist minister from Portsmouth. Some of you have heard him. He has an incredible story about his own journey. We thought it was such a great story that we wanted to invite him up here today to share it all with you. So Jim, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. It was the 1st of September, and I'm 14 years old. And I'm standing at the bottom of the stairs in full school uniform, and I am begging my mother not to make me go back to school. Why? Because I had eczema. I knew that the moment I walked through that school gate, the name calling and the teasing would begin. Flaky pastry was their favorite. I knew that as the day went on, blood spots would start to appear in the back of my shirt, and it would take me a while to work out why people were pointing and laughing. Because the thing about eczema is that although it's not life-threatening, you can't hide it. I remember going to swimming class and reluctantly getting changed into my trunks and slipping into the end of the swimming pool, and then hearing another boy say to the teacher, "That makes me feel sick. I don't want to get in the pool with Jim. I might catch it." I remember having a little BO after games class because I was too embarrassed to get into the showers, the communal shower with the other boys, and I couldn't use deodorant because it would flare my skin up. And so I guess that having eczema, having atopic dermatitis really became part of my identity. It was always the most obvious thing about me, kind of what I was known for. And that's how things went on. That was my normal. I became a minister because I wanted to help people. I've always wanted to help people. But I hadn't really anticipated the impact that my condition would have on my work life. When I would get up to speak like this, if my skin was bad, it would look like I'd been in a punch-up. I used to go and do home visits, but if the family had a pet, then the pet hair would make my skin flare up, and it was so embarrassing. After a while, they stopped inviting me. One year, we did a building project, and it was kind of all hands on deck, and everyone was mucking in. I tried to help, but it was so dusty and dirty, and it just flared my skin up. I think most people understood, but some people just thought I was being lazy. In my sort of church, we do adult baptisms, and if someone wants to be baptized into the church, they go down to a little pool and we baptize them under the water, submerge them. It's a symbolic thing, but I couldn't really do it if my skin was bad because of the water and how it would affect me, and so I would sometimes get someone else to do it, which was fine, except on one occasion it was a teenage girl being baptized, and I'd got someone else to do it for me, and I heard afterwards that someone in the audience had made the comment to the trustees, "Why is the minister not allowed in the pool with a teenage girl? Is there a safeguarding issue? Do we need to be concerned?" So this was my life. It got so bad on occasion that I would be hospitalized because of it and had to spend extended time away from work. But then I got married, and I just remember feeling so lucky that I'd met someone to share my life with who was just so understanding and loving and patient. But getting married was like shining a spotlight on just how much this condition affected my everyday life. Like sleeping. I would be restless throughout the night and scratching and itching, even in my sleep. My wife's a very light sleeper, and so more often than not, we ended up sleeping in separate rooms. If I'm honest with you, when my skin was bad, I got rather irritable. Just wanted to be left alone, didn't want to be touched. And so I'm sure you can imagine how this put quite a strain on our relationship. It even impacted family planning. I was given various treatments over the years, starting with topical steroids on my skin, moving on to more serious disease-modifying drugs like azathioprine, methotrexate. I was a bit nervous when I Googled them and found that these were the drugs used in some cancers. But I was out of options. I also tried UVB light treatment, although I cringe when I think about that because I arrived for the first session. I was shown down a little corridor into a room with a sort of stand-up sunbed, you can imagine. After a while, this rather matronly nurse arrived and told me to pop my clothes off, and then she gave me a single gym sock and said, "Don't forget to put this on." To which I rather naively, as a young man, replied, "I don't understand. Why have you only given me one sock?" Which led to a rather awkward conversation for both of us. And then in 2015, I was given the opportunity to embark on a clinical trial for a new drug called Dupixent. It was explained that this was a fully human monoclonal antibody, one of the new generation biologic drugs. And I wasn't really too keen at first. My father had not long passed away. I just didn't need the stress of it all. But I was out of options. The drugs that I was on had a very narrow therapeutic window, and so I was having to come off them anyway, so I agreed. At first, it wasn't all that pleasant. I had to have a 1-month washout from all creams, all tablets, and during that month, my skin raged. I found that all the paperwork and all the testing was very onerous. I hated injecting myself with the drug. There were some side effects at first. I got a little bit of flu-like symptoms and developed some painful nodules on the side of my face. But the results were far outweighed all of that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I am completely cured. My skin is absolutely clear. This is me as best man at my brother's wedding. Clear skin, thick, itchy, woolen suit, no problem. Could help set up the marquee in the dust and dirt, no issue. There's me and my wife baptizing someone not long afterwards. No problem at all. In fact, do you know, I now consider myself not to have eczema. I was really interested to talk to Jack and discover about your Everyday Moments campaign, because now my everyday moments are so much more positive. I'm much less paranoid about going environments where there might be dust or pet hair. I can travel anywhere I want around the world without worrying about the climate or being stopped at customs with a bag full of drugs. I can play sports, which isn't necessarily a positive thing because I dislocated my shoulder 2 weeks ago. If I'd been in this room a few years ago, I wouldn't have come in because I saw when I walked down the grass that you'd had a smoke machine. I would have run in the opposite direction, but now it didn't bother me. Came straight in. Psychologically, I just feel so much better about myself. My wife and I sleep in the same bed. In fact, after 12 years of marriage, having almost given up hope, in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be having a baby. Guys, I speak to people from all walks of life in my job. Over the last 20 years, I've been invited to address groups ranging from senior government ministers in Uganda to a group of Class A criminals in prison. And in a moment, I'll share 1 or 2 lessons I've learned along the way. I've worked with organizations and teams of all shapes and sizes, but talking to you is special because none of them have done for me what you've done for me. You've made me well. And so from the bottom of my heart, the main reason I've come today is to say thank you. You've changed my life. I don't know whether there's anyone here and you're feeling a bit frustrated with work at the moment, and however much you try, it just seems impossible to get anything of meaning done. I'm here to tell you the job you do makes a difference. Soren, thank you. Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, tells lots of stories about geese. Those of you from Denmark will know that normally they have goose for Christmas rather than turkey. And at the bottom of the valley where he used to sit and write his books, Kierkegaard noticed that there was a goose farm. And as the years went on, he said, I noticed the same thing every year. In the early spring, the goslings would hatch. And they would look up at the sky, for they were made to fly. And before long, they would start to flap their tiny little wings, and they would run up and down on their tiny little legs, and they would squawk. I'm going to have to speak louder. But Kierkegaard noticed that after a while, a lorry would arrive and unload onto the farmyard a mountain of grain far higher than the little geese could see. And suddenly the geese would stop looking up and they would look down and peck the grain. And as the weeks turned into months, he noticed these geese getting more plump and bloated, for they were table geese, being fattened up for Christmas. And before long, they never used to look up at the sky at all. They never flapped their little wings or ran up and down. They just spent all day looking at the floor and pecking the grain. Except that is for 1 week every September, when the wild geese would fly overhead and the sky would be filled with these migrating geese chasing the sun, looking for spring. And the table geese would look up for the first time in months and they would see their wild cousins flying overhead. And they would try to flap their underdeveloped wings and sort of waddle up and down on their stumpy little legs, and they would squawk. But then the wild geese would be gone, and the table geese would look down again and peck the grain. No geese out there today. I wonder if you've ever felt like one of those table geese. You've looked up and you've seen people and teams that just seem to fly high. And they seem to be just collaborative and agile. They work together, they get things done, and you've yearned to be like that. But you just seem to be pecking the grain. Well, just for a few minutes before we go to lunch, I've just been asked to just share a few thoughts on your theme for the day of collaboration and agility. I've just got 3 simple thoughts, and I'll take less than 5 minutes on each. And the first one is this: discover the power of individuality. We've all heard the phrase, there's no I in team. And while it may be true grammatically, nothing kills a team faster. So Alex Ferguson was so successful with Manchester United because he knew how to let individual talent flourish while maintaining the team ethos. And you will be the best asset to your team, not by trying to be a clone of everyone else, but by bringing to the table what is unique about you, by being yourself. But in order to do that, you not only need to know what your strengths are, you also need to be aware what your weaknesses are. Has anyone ever been in a job interview and been asked, what are your weaknesses? Hands up. Keep your hand up if you told the truth. Okay. Of course you didn't. If you were smart, you said, I've got a real weakness for Cadbury's Dairy Milk. Or like all the candidates said at the Tory leadership debate, my weakness is that I just work too hard for my constituents. I'm just too committed. But I want to suggest to you that your weaknesses, far from being something to hide from, can actually be an asset. I mentioned about Sarah, my wife, and Sarah has dyslexia. She remembers growing up at school and sometimes she'd get her words in the wrong order or show up at the wrong classroom for lessons. It wasn't the laughter from the other children that hurt her the most. It was the frustration from the teachers. If only you would try a little harder, then you'll get it. You'd soon get it if only you listened a little bit more carefully. Well, of course, it didn't work, and so Sarah grew up thinking that she wasn't very intelligent. But then she met a teacher who told her that she had a gift, that she could see things differently. Skip forward 20 years. And when Sarah graduated with first-class honours and was asked to give the valedictory speech at her graduation, she finally realised that what that old teacher had said all those years before was true. She'd learnt that her weakness could be a strength. Maybe there's someone here and you feel like you've never really fitted in. You always see things differently from everyone else. Maybe it's time to be a little kinder to yourself and rebrand what others have seen as a weakness as a strength. A friend of ours called Jenny is a natural-born leader. She has scaled more heights in business than most of us have even attempted. She's broken every glass ceiling almost going. And when she was at school, she was always pushing the boundaries, and the teachers didn't always appreciate it. And eventually her parents went into school and said, look, I understand Jenny needs to follow the rules, but she's not a naughty child. She's a leader. Many years later, someone asked her father, when did you first discover that Jenny was a leader? He didn't skip a beat. He said, when she was 5 years old. I was watching out of my study and she was cycling up and down on her tricycle. And I went down and I said, Jenny, you can go anywhere you like in the garden except beyond the back gate. If you go further than that gate, you're going to be getting a spanking. Well, then Jenny did something which her father says he will remember for the rest of his life. She looked up, she smiled, and then she pulled down her shorts and said, well, Daddy, you might as well spank me now because I've got places to go. Discover the power of individuality. But in order for that to work, it must go hand in hand with my second suggestion. Discover the power of humility. Lord Danett, who was the former head of the British Armed Forces, describes in his autobiography what he considers to be the essential qualities of a successful army officer. And they are these: absolute fitness, enduring courage, complete integrity, and undaunted willpower. It's a good list, but it's not enough, he said. The most important is the last one: true humility. And the secret of humility is to rejoice in the victory of others. Collaboration is the opposite of the competitive, greasy pole, dog-eat-dog culture that we live in. As President Harry S. Truman put it so famously, it's amazing what you can achieve if you do not care who gets the credit. We live on the south coast, and near our house you can watch in June the Isle of Wight yacht race. It's absolutely stunning. Hundreds of yachts tearing through the waves. But what does it take for a yacht to win? Extraordinary engineering? Of course. Expert craftsmanship? No doubt. A powerful wind? Absolutely. But all of the boats have those things. What makes the difference between the winner and the loser? A collaborative, agile team working together as one. Not one guy saying, I think we need to go this way, and another saying we ought to go that way. Not one person refusing to pull because it's not in their job description. Not someone taking the credit for the whole team. Absolute fitness, enduring courage, undaunted willpower, and true humility. My final point is the most important, and it's this: discover the power of truth-telling. Some years ago, I was on board a Royal Navy warship. Pretty important in that situation to be collaborative and agile, wouldn't you think? I was taken up to meet the captain, and I said, how are things? How's the crew? How's morale? He said, fantastic. Everyone's happy. Everyone's on board. Everyone's committed. All the feedback from the crew is first rate. You know what I'm going to say next. I went down to the mess hall, and everyone was complaining. We weren't given the shore leave we needed. No one communicates with us. We just don't feel valued. Now, I don't know whether that captain was out of touch or just putting a positive spin on things, but what I do know is that it wasn't a truth-telling culture. I had a young man ring me recently and said, I'm really struggling at work. I said, tell me. He said, I feel a bit silly mentioning it because it's not as if anyone's openly hostile towards me. I've got friends at work. I actually quite enjoy the job. It's just that everything in the office is so political. People backstab each other and they talk behind each other's backs and they'll say one thing and do another. I'm constantly trying to work out who I can trust. In fact, he said, it sometimes feels like I'm back in the playground, and it is just so draining. My advice to him was to discover the power of truth-telling, to become a peacemaker by daring to tell the truth. If there's an elephant in the room, then sooner or later someone needs to name it. If someone's holding you back from getting your work done, before long you're going to have to deal with it. face to face if you possibly can, perhaps over a coffee, but you're going to have to name the issue and find a solution. But we don't. Why not? Well, because most people think you have to make a choice between speaking the truth and keeping the peace. In reality, the opposite can be true if done well. If you master the art of truth-telling, then okay, it might be awkward at first. It won't always work. But in the long run, you will create far more allies than enemies. You will start to become known as someone who tells it as it is. And in fact, after a while, you'll find that you're not just a peacekeeper, but a peacemaker. It's no surprise that the most collaborative, agile teams excel at truth-telling. They've created a culture where people feel free to say it as it is. As I come into land, there's just a little maxim that I like to use in any team that I work with, and it's this. First of all, work out what is the right thing to do in any situation. And only then do you start to think about what's the most politically sensitive way to go about it. But most people start with the politics. Oh, well, we better not change that process because, well, that's John's area, isn't it? And we all know how upset John gets when things get changed around. But that's table geese thinking. Truly collaborative, agile teams first start with what is the right thing to do. Yes, we really believe that this process needs to change. Fine. Well, now we've agreed that. Second, we can work out how on earth we put it across to John. So just have a think for a moment. Lunch is being prepared. I won't take you another few minutes. But just think about a situation that you're struggling with at the moment. It may be at home, it may be at work. Is there something you could do differently? I realize there are so many factors that don't depend on you, but is there something you could do differently? By discovering the power of individuality, not being afraid to be yourself. The power of humility, caring a little bit less who gets the credit. And the power of truth-telling, becoming a peacemaker by telling it as it is. I realize I hardly know any of you, much less the pressures you're under. I get that times are hard. I know we're only beginning to understand the implications of Brexit and all that that will mean, coupled with financial restraints and technological advances. Projects these days are far more complicated than they ever used to be, often with many stakeholders, each with their own agenda. I get all of that. In fact, if you'd like to get in touch and just have an outside perspective or perhaps even just a listening ear, my email is revjim@talktalk.net. I'd love to hear from you. I'll close with one last story. Federal Express is a $64 billion company, bigger even than Sanofi, if you can believe it. But they started in 1912 as a railroad company. And as technology developed and rail travel changed to air travel, many railroad companies went bust. But FedEx excelled. Why? Because they never saw themselves primarily as a railroad company. They saw themselves primarily as a delivery company. Where others said our business is trains, they said our business is delivering parcels by whatever means. You see, others focused on the method. FedEx focused on the purpose. You've got a purpose, haven't you? Empowering life. So can I just encourage you to keep reminding yourself of that? You change people's lives, and you've certainly changed mine. So why not put pictures up in your office of the people that your drugs have helped, the lives that you have changed, and be more committed to the purpose than to the method. I hope some of what I've said has been helpful, but if you take nothing else away, then on behalf of me and my family and countless others you will never meet, never forget the job you do makes a difference. Thanks for listening. God bless.